Hi everyone, in this video we're going to be going through the Progressive, Regressive plus Consumption Tax Study Guide. So this is the second week of Unit 3, and so we're just going to be building on the work we did last week with flat taxes to a slightly different tax system that still uses some of the same ideas but does a certain part of it in a different way. So in this system, a progressive system, and it has a few different names, but progressive is the one we're going to use in this class mostly. So a progressive tax system, we apply taxes, and when I mean that percentage step, that you're multiplying by a percent. So that step that we're used to, we did last week, that step we do things slightly differently. So I think the best way to try to have you understand this is to first reference the flat tax system we talked about, and then just show you what this new system looks like. So just to remember, if you have a flat tax system, like a flat income tax in some states, right? If you have a flat tax system, then everybody pays the same percentage on their income. So it doesn't matter if you make $10,000, $100,000, $1 million as your income. Every person pays 10%, if that's the example, 10% of their income, or whatever percent the state has. So if you make $1 million, you have to pay more because 10% of $1 million is more than 10% of 100,000 or 10% of 10,000. But everyone pays the same percent, okay? And so, kind of quickly, the way that we did that to actually do the percent was we just said, okay, if you make $10,000, I can multiply by my percentage and you'll pay $1,000. So that was the process we had talked about last week. And just to kind of reaffirm what I had said, if you make $100,000 and we're in a flat tax system, well, you still pay 10% because it's flat, same. But of course you pay more. So you'll pay more money because you make more, but it's flat. So these are examples of a flat tax system. Same percent. So what's progressive then? Well, a progressive tax system does not have just one flat tax amount like up here. Instead, it gives brackets. And so depending on how much you make, you will pay different percentages based on these brackets. Now, I think the initial way that you hear that, and what many people assume, is that I make more money and I get into a new bracket, all my money is taxed at that higher level. That is not the way that the systems work that we're going to look at. So like federal income tax as an example, it does not work that way. I would guess if you went out and asked some people they would either have no idea how the system works, or they would assume it works that way, where the bracket determines what you pay for your whole income. Not how this works. It's more complicated than that. It's really not too bad if you do it a few times and you kind of get a feel for it. And it's definitely a fairer system than that one, right? That one sounds worse than it actually is. So we're going to have to do this to kind of dispel that, because it's an idea that I think is ingrained in a lot of people when they hear progressive tax, and it's not how this works when we're talking about it, as the federal income tax is our big kind of example. So what does this look like? Well, let's just jump into an example to kind of see it. So here's my warning. That's what I just said. Make sure you're paying attention to that. So all right, let's get into an example here. So we have got a tax bracket here. Usually they're more complicated than this, but I'm just trying to make it as simple as possible for our example. So we've got two brackets here. Anybody who's making money that fills up this, that doesn't make any sense. 3, 2, 1. Our bracket has two parts here, right? So on the left is your income, your taxable income, and on your right, the marginal tax rate. That's telling you what's the percent for money that fills in this box. So what this is telling me is that everybody, no, I'm still about to say this wrong. 3, 2, 1. So we see in this tax bracket here, there's just two parts to it. The first part is any money between $0 and $50,000 that you have in taxable income gets hit by 10%. So then the way this works is basically the brackets, you have your income and you fill the brackets up. So if you don't fill this bracket up, that's okay. You just pay 10% on everything. But if your income is more than $50,000, you could think of it like paint. You're like pouring paint in here, and then it overflows into the next bracket. Now, you still filled this up with $50,000 of income, and so you pay 10% because that's what it says. But then any of the money that you made more than 50%, that overflows into this next box. And that specific money gets taxed at 20%, not the original $50,000. Your first $50,000 you made gets hit by 10%. It doesn't matter how much you actually make. If you make $1 million, your first $50,000 is 10%. If you only make $50,000, 10%. If you make $100,000, your first $50,000, it gets hit by 10%. So everybody's first $50,000 or less income gets taxed at 10%. It's just that if you make more, it overflows that box into the next one, and then that extra money gets taxed higher. So let's try these two so you can see it in action. So for person A, they make $50,000. Okay, so their income's $50,000. So how do I figure out what to do? Well, I take their income, right? I take their income and I go find it in the table. And I ask myself, okay, first box, do I have income? Yes, so I need to tax. And then I ask myself, do I fill the box up? I do fill the box up. 50,000. This here is the kind of top of the box. So I take my 50,000 and I tax it at 10%, just like we did before. That'll give me $5,000 to pay. So it doesn't seem different for this person from the flat tax. Okay, well, so now I just have to ask myself, am I done? Is there any more money left over of my income? And I look and I say, okay, well, 50,000 is my income. And one way you could do this is you could subtract your income. So here's a way you could kind of check. This is a little check for yourself. Do your income minus, and then the top end of the bracket. So let's put a little star here, or a little squiggly. The top end of each bracket. So if I was to do that, I would take my $50,000 income. If I've already filled it up and I'm like, ooh, did I go over? And then I would just subtract the top end and I get $0. So I've filled up the first box with my income. And I don't go any further over, I just filled up the first box. So I'm just done. I pay $5,000. And that's it. So it's not too bad. If you're only in the first box, it's not that bad. You just take your income, apply the tax rate, and you're done. Just like we did before. Where things change, look a little different, is part B. So in part B, get out of there, you. Part B, we say, okay, I've got 100,000. And so I first go to the first box and say, okay, use the first box. Well, I fill up the first box. So I fill box 1. So if you fill box 1, then that just means you take the upper limit, 50,000. Okay. You take your $50,000 and you apply the tax to it, which is $5,000. Okay. So not too bad. Your first 50,000 gets hit by the 10%. But how does this work now? Well, you can do this little check calculation. So check yourself. Did you go over? Well, take your 100,000. You could do this in your head most of the time just to know. But we can still write it out. I did go over. I've got money left. This here is money left from the first box. I've got $50,000 more that has not been taxed yet. So I take that money and I go to the next box. So then box 2. Now I'm in box 2. So this was all box 1. I filled up box 1. Now let's go to box 2. I've got $50,000 left. Okay. And so then I go into this box. This box wants you to look at all the money you made between $50,000 and $100,000. And actually, it just so happens we fill up this box as well. So we fill this box. Okay, so we took our $50,000 and first dollar, that one extra dollar we're thinking about, plus all the other dollars we made up to $100,000 gets hit by 20%. So there's $50,000 total. That's how much is inside this box here, which we can do a little calculation to show you that in a second. There's $50,000 in box 2, and I hit that with a 20%, which is $10,000. So how much did I pay? Well, I had to pay $5,000 from the first chunk of my income, and then I had to pay $10,000 on the next chunk of my income. So my total is $5,000 for the first part of my income plus $10,000. I pay $15,000 in total. And that's always your last step in these problems, or when you're doing this. You find how much you have to pay for each individual box that you put money, you get money into, that you fill some of it. Then you just add those up. So this is how this works. You fill up the first box, hit it with 10% in this case. Do you have money left over? Okay, put it into the second box, hit it with 20%. Do you have money left over? Go to the next box, and then keep going until you run out of money. Now, each time you do a new one, a new bracket, you're going to have to think about how much money actually goes into there. And so the way that we do this is, this box wasn't too hard. 0 to 50,000 is just 50,000. But then this one, the second box, what you do is to figure out how much money goes into this box, you take the top end of this box minus the top end of the previous box. So let me point these out. You take this top end, subtract this previous top end. I'll just use this green again. So what is this saying? This is saying, okay, I already got taxed on 50,000. So that's why I minus. I'm saying move that away. This box goes up to 100,000, but do not tax me again on this first 50,000. Get that out of the box. I've already done that. Just tax me on the difference between these two. That's how you figure out how much money to actually put into the equation. This little calculation you do to figure out how much actual money of yours will go into the second box is how we figure out that number. So let's try another one just so we can kind of see what it looks like when you get something bigger than this. So here's another example. This is one that you'll use in the homework. This is coming straight from the book, this tax bracket. So the way this is going to work, again, very similar, is, and we've got a bunch of these to try here, is we're just going to run through the boxes each time. So let's start with the 25,000. Okay, so what do? Well, we take our 25,000 and we start with box 1. And so when I mean box 1, I'm labeling them like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So we start with box 1. Okay, and we take our 25,000 and we bring it over here and we ask ourselves, all right, what's going on here? Did I fill this up? Yes, 25,000's bigger than 8,375. So because I fill up the box, that means that I pay my 10% because that's what this says, on this full amount. Okay, so there's $8,375 in box 1, which is whatever this top end number ends up in this first box, times 10%, which is $8,375. So that's how much of my money I pay for the first bracket in this tax bracket. That equals $837.50. Don't shortchange the IRS. Okay, so there you go. We filled up the first box with our first $8,375, and we paid 10% of that. So we go to box 2, and we say, okay, well, looking at this, do I fill up box 2? No, because $25,000, my income is less than this. So I don't fill the box up. So then how much do I actually have that goes into here? Well, the first step you have to do, little step 1 here, is answer that question. How much actually goes into this income bracket? And what you do is you say, okay, you take your income, because that's how much money you have, and the amount that goes in is whatever is left over when you take out the amount you've already been taxed on. So I've got $25,000 income. Do not tax me again on the whole thing. IRS, don't do it. Only tax me on whatever is left from what you already taxed me on. You taxed me on this, so I'm going to take it away. Now whatever's left over, that's what fills in this box. So we can do that. That's not too bad to do. So we get out our calculator and we type in 25,000 minus 8,375, and that gives us $16,625. This is the amount of money that we will be putting into the second box to be taxed. Step 2, tax it. Take the amount of money that your income is filling into this box and tax it. It gets taxed at, don't overpay the IRS, it gets taxed at 15%, because that's this tax rate here. So then we just take that number and we type in times 0.15, and that's equal to $2,493.75. So that's how much tax you pay on your income that falls into the second bracket. But remember, we said that we didn't fill that bracket up, right? So then we're done. We're all out of money to be taxed. So our total tax is, well, $837.50. That was our first chunk we got taxed, plus the second chunk we got taxed. And all we have to do is end up adding these together. So in our calculator, we add 837.50, gives us $3,331.25. So that's how much person A pays. Okay, so person A's done. Let's go to person B. Person B makes $50,000. Okay, so person B makes $50,000. So the process is very similar. We go here and we go to box 1. And so we say, okay, I made $50,000. Do I fill up this box? Yes. So take how much is in this box, multiply by 10%. So let's write that down. Just kidding. Why would I do that? I already know what this answer is. We shouldn't waste time doing the same exact calculation. I already did it. When you're doing a problem like this, you don't need to repeat yourself. Remember, the whole point of this system is that every person who makes at least this much money pays the same exact amount in taxes on that money. So then, person who makes $25,000, person who makes $50,000, person who makes 100,000, 150,000, it doesn't matter. Their first $8,375 all get taxed at 10%. They all pay this much money for that first chunk of their income. So don't worry about having to redo those calculations. Box 2 will be different. Why? Well, let me bring this down so we don't have to keep going back up. Why would box 2 be different? Well, we fill up box 2. Look, 50,000 is bigger than 34,000. So we fill up box 2. But we've got to figure out actually how much goes in here, right? So we still have to figure out how much goes in here. So how did we do that last time in the example above? We take the top end of box 2, okay, and we subtract how much you've already put into this tax equation. We already got taxed on our first 8,375. Now we're saying, okay, how much goes into the second box? So this is our little step 1 here we have to do. So we take our 34,000 minus 8,375. That gives me a total of $25,625 that I am going to be taxed on in this second bracket. Okay. So we'll color code this a little bit. That goes here. All right, so then what do? Our little step 2. Our little step 2 is take that money that you're putting into box 2, okay, and apply the tax. How much does that give me? That's 25,625 times my 15% means I pay $3,843.75. Okay, so give myself some more space here. So that's how much I, as a person who makes 50,000, pay in that second box there. But I filled it up, so that means I've got to go now to box 3. I have more money left over. Okay, well, checking this out, this number, this top of box 3 is bigger than my actual amount I make. So what do? We figure out, well, how much actually do I fill up this box? I take my 50,000 and I subtract away, and then remember, the top of the previous box. At this point, the IRS has already taxed me on $34,000 of my income. So in order to figure out how much is left for them to tax, you just take your income and subtract that number. So this is, I've got $16,000 left for them to tax me on. Okay, and then my little step 2 here, I take that $16,000 that they're going to tax me on, that fits into box 3, and I multiply by 25%. So we take 16,000 in our calculators times 0.25, and that is $4,000. Okay, so what do? Well, we hit the last box because we can't fill it up anymore, so we stop, and over here under the total we say, what was the first one? 837.50 plus, what was the second box? We paid $3,843.75 plus, and then in the fourth box we paid $4,000. And then we just add all these numbers together to figure out what we pay in total. 4,000 plus 3,843.75 plus 837.5. You will pay a total of $8,681.25. And there you go. Boom. Well, that's how much we pay if we make 50,000. Okay, so the next person, I make 100,000. How much do I pay? Well, let's actually bring another one of these down here again so we don't have to keep going up. Remember, it's the same thing. We do the same idea here, right? We go, okay, I'm going to start in box 1. I definitely fill that up, so apply the tax. But remember, I don't have to do that out again. If you fill up that box, you're paying $837.50 no matter what. Box 2. Well, I definitely fill up that box because 100,000 is bigger than 34,000. But I already did that calculation, right? I filled that box up in part B. So we're just going to grab the number again. No reason to have to repeat ourselves. All right, well, let's check out box 3 now. I look box 3, that goes up to $82,400. I do fill that one up. That's not the case in the previous example, so I'm going to have to do a little more work here. So first things first, how much money actually is in box 3? 82,400 minus, how much have you already been taxed on? You've already been taxed on your first $34,000. So we just go into our calculators, we type in 82,400 minus 34,000, and that gives us $48,400. That is what is getting taxed in box 3. So this is getting hit in box 3 by the 25%. So step 2 then, take that amount, multiply by 0.25 because that's the percentage that we're doing here. So take that times 0.25, and if you fill up box 3, then for that amount you are going to be paying $12,100. Get myself some more space here. Okay, so that's box 3. So then box 4. Well, let's look. Box 4. Go over to box 4. Remember, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, box 5, box 6. I do not fill this one up, right? 171,000 is more than I make. So then we just have to figure out how much do I actually fill into this box. $100,000 minus, and I've already been taxed on 82,400 of my dollars. So remember, I just compare, do a little color coding here. I just take my actual top end income and I'm comparing it to the box of the previous one, the top of that previous box, because that's how much I've actually already been taxed on. Okay, so this would then be $17,600. That's how much of my money is going to fit into box 4. So then what do? I take that amount, my 76,000. Oh no, where did that come from? My 17,000, and I multiply it by box 4's rate, which is 28%. Okay, so I take my 17,600 times my 28%, and I'm going to end up paying in this box $4,928 from box 4. And I'm done with the boxes because I ran out of money. I started with 100,000. I didn't fill up in box 4, so I am all out of money now. Okay, so what do? I just do my total. Remember, my total is start with box 1. Okay, add box 2. Add box 3, because I hit box 3. I made enough to get into that box. And then finally, I got into box 4. I didn't fill it up, but I got in there. And then we could just go into our calculators, and we add up all these numbers. So box 1, add it. Box 2, add it. Don't forget the point here. Box 3, add it. Box 4, add it. Altogether, I got $21,709.25. All right. So there we go. That's how much you're going to pay in income tax if you make $100,000. So again, just to kind of reiterate that point, $100,000 puts me into bracket 4 in a sense. Not that you will get taxed at 28% for all your money. That's not how it works. It just means that that's the highest level that your money will be hit at. Some portion of it will be hit at a 28% rate, but not all of it. All right, $150,000. So let's bring this back down so we don't have to keep going up. Okay, how does this work? Well, starts off very similar, right? Starts off very similar. Box 1. Again, though, remember, every person pays the same amount for box 1. $837.50. Box 2. I fill up box 2. Everyone pays the same amount if you fill up box 2 on that chunk of your money. Box 3. I fill up box 3, so I'm going to pay the same amount as the previous person on that income that fits into box 3. Box 4. So this is different now because box 4, I still don't fill up box 4, but I fill it up more. So it'll definitely be different than this number. So what do I do here? Again, my step 1, I make $150,000. I take that away from, well, how much have I already been taxed? I've already been taxed on this first chunk of my money, this $82,400. So then I just have to figure out, okay, well, what's left of my money? So I just take $150,000 minus $82,400, and this ends up being $67,600. This is the amount of money I have that is going to be taxed in box 4. So then your little step 2 here, you take that amount of money that you're going to have taxed in that box and you multiply it by the tax rate, which remember is 28% in that box. So then that ends up being $18,928. Altogether, we just total because we run out of money to be taxed. You take your start, that's box 1, plus box 2, plus box 3, plus box 4, which is where I end. All right, so we go in here and we add them all up. 3843.75, 12,100, 18,928. So altogether, I'm going to pay $35,709.25. Okay, so there we go. I did want to just kind of, just for that warning, again, just to kind of show you what's happening here. We can still apply the same idea of the effective tax rate, right? What am I really paying here in terms of my original income? So I did not do any tax credits or deductions or anything here. So I haven't done any of those things, but still we can do this kind of quickly to see what's happening here. Remember, what you do is you take the amount you pay, okay, and we're just going to pretend there were no deductions or anything like that. And so take your income. This is going to tell me what percentage of your original income you paid in taxes. So I divide by 150,000 and I get 0.238. We'll round there. So this is rounded. Okay, so then this is 23.8%. That's, if you just look at how much you paid compared to how much income you had, you paid 23.8% of your taxes as this 150,000 person. So if you just tried to use that way of thinking that you pay, if you're in this box, you're going to pay this percent. That's not what happened. You didn't pay 28% in taxes. You paid 23.8%. Right? So it's not that way. We have to break it up into these pieces and get taxed at these individual marginal tax rates. So in this example Excel sheet, we did a few different things here. The first one was looking at a flat tax for income tax, what that looks like. So we got a few different people here, and you can kind of pretend this is just like a tiny town with 6 people in it. So these are the incomes of the 6 people. It's a flat 10% rate for everybody. This is how much they'll pay. So you can check this out. All I did was use a little cell reference and multiply income times tax rate. So this is yours to have. So make sure you're checking it out if you want to use it. And in here everywhere there are formulas that you can just take and use for yourself, or however you want to use it, it's fine. So everybody pays 10%. This is how much they pay. So here's the total income, and then I've added up how much they actually paid in tax total. Okay, so here is a separate piece to kind of think through what's happening here a little bit. So person number 1, right here, who makes 10,000, they have 2% of the total income of this little town. They pay 2% of the total tax. That's what this flat rate is doing. It's making it so that whatever proportion of the income you have in your town or your state or whatever, that's kind of the way this simplified one is set up, you're going to pay that percent of the total taxes that are collected. So this person had 3% of all the income made. They pay 3% of all the taxes for income. 6%, blah, blah, blah. This person made 51% of all the income made in total in the whole town. They made over half of all the money that was made. They pay 51% of the taxes. Okay? So you see that equality between those two. The exact percentage you're making out of the whole town, that's the percentage you're paying in taxes as well. So that's a flat tax. That's how that works kind of on the whole. But then over here, for the progressive tax, we have another example. So here are the brackets and the rates. That's an extra piece of information that we're going to need. Okay, and so using that, we've got, again, the same people in the town, these 6 people. And now, using the bracket, this is how much tax they paid. Okay, so they each paid this much tax. And you can compare. Over here, being taxed at 10%, person 1 paid 1,000. Over here, they paid a little more than 1,000 because their $10,000 filled up this bracket, but then splashed into this one a little bit as well. So they had to pay a small amount of their money at 12%. That's why it's a little higher. So then you can just go through and see the calculations that were done in here. It's exactly what we did on the study guide together. All right, and so in total, this is how much tax they paid. As a whole group, this is how much tax they paid. So I just added all these up. Okay, now here's the interesting thing with this progressive tax, and this is hopefully something that will help you see that it's progressive. Okay, so you can ignore the effective tax rate for now, but this is what I want you to focus on right here. The percentage of total income of your town, 2%. This doesn't change. The person who made $10,000, right, they made 2% of the town's income. This person made 3% of the town's income, 6%, and then all the way down here, you made 51%. Now, look at what percent of the income tax that was total collected they paid. This is what makes it progressive. This person who made 51% of all the income in the town actually paid 62% of all the tax that was collected. So they paid a larger proportion of all tax that was collected. And this works all the way through. So you see kind of what's happening here, and you can see, the possible pros and cons to something like this. The person who makes 2% of all the income in the town, they have the smallest piece of the income pie of the town. They actually only pay 1% of the income tax. So because they have the smallest piece of the income, in a progressive system, they actually pay less proportionally in the income tax. And because of the way it was set up in the incomes I gave, that's actually true for the first 5 people. They have smaller chunks of the pie, and so in a progressive tax system, they pay a lower percentage of the tax. You could think of it like the tax burden, if you know how you want to say that, is shifted partially off of people who make lower incomes onto those who make more. And you can see that just from the numbers. Person who makes 51% of the income, they have to pay a higher proportion of taxes that are collected. And so these people who got to pay less, that paying less compared to the flat tax was shifted onto this person. And so when it kind of comes down to it, that's really the difference between a progressive tax and a flat tax system. You can think of it individually if you want to, but you can also kind of think of these examples where you've got a collection of people with varying incomes at different levels, and you can think of it on the whole, what that looks like. Okay? And so that's something that you can play around with a little bit if you want, and it's something that I'm not going to ask you about specifically to reproduce anything like this, but if you're trying to really think about these ideas, this can be something that helps you think about it in a slightly different way than just one person at a time. Okay, let's jump back over. So the other chunk of taxes that we're going to talk about here are regressive and consumption taxes. So these aren't too bad. They're really ideas, not new taxes and new things we have to calculate. They're just ideas. So consumption tax, and in the book, you can read about this in the book, so I linked it here, but also there's another link here that you can read more about excise taxes as a specific example. A consumption tax is a tax on spending. So you buy something, you get taxed for it, that's a consumption tax. The one that we're most familiar with, probably sales tax, right? You go buy clothes, you pay sales tax. That is a tax on your consumption. Okay? That's it. That's the idea. But there are other types of consumption taxes. A big one that you probably pay but aren't, aware of necessarily are excise taxes. And so gasoline is the one most people are paying that you might not be aware of. There's this extra tax included in the price of gas. You don't, print out your receipt and it says tax on the thing. It is included inside the price of gasoline. Okay, so you're not technically necessarily paying it up front. It's something that is being included into the price and raises the price. So you are paying it, right, directly, but there's also this indirect aspect to it. And so these are things, a lot of these times you'll hear things, not gasoline necessarily, but you can view it that way as well, as sin taxes, if you've ever heard something like that before. Tobacco, alcohol. We're going to tax on these things that sometimes we tax on them because we are trying to prevent people from doing them. That's one reason for tobacco specifically that these taxes came about, was in an effort to curb the use of cigarettes. The cigarettes is the one that I think is most in people's minds, so you can use that one if you want. Now, we could really talk a lot and go very deep into just even that one specific tax and looking at all of the different studies that have been done and effects of having an excise tax on cigarettes as our example. We could really dive deep into that. We're going to touch on it a little bit in example 5, just one aspect of it in terms of these tax ideas. But that's a really interesting thing I would suggest looking more into, because there's all of these different ways that this tax has effects that really branch out and touch a lot of different things that are interesting and useful to talk about and know. So that's a consumption tax, a tax on spending. The next idea is a regressive tax. And so a regressive tax, this is its own tax system, but no taxes really are set up to be regressive on purpose necessarily. These are taxes that are set up most of the time just being flat, like a flat tax, that just happens to also be regressive. So a regressive tax, and we'll do some examples in a second, are taxes that are set up and then end up filling out this definition. So in here it says a tax is regressive if it takes a smaller proportion of your income as your income rises. So everyone's being taxed on something. The tax is regressive if, as you make more money, that tax is taking a smaller percent of your income. And so it's a little bit too much necessarily to say you feel it less. I'm putting air quotes, which you can't see. I'm not necessarily saying that, like just because you make more money, you don't feel the tax. But in terms of just your income, you can think of it like that. Or in the opposite direction, a tax is regressive if the less money you make, the more you kind of feel, again, quotes, the tax. Because it's regressive, and so the less money you make, the larger percentage of your income that is gobbling up, because you make less money. So that's a regressive tax. Not the best thing in the world to have this happen, but these tax systems, some of them that are set up, they end up being regressive. It's not that, it was on purpose necessarily, but just because of what people are buying and across income groups, it just works out that way. So here's an example, and this graph comes straight from the book, so you can check it out in there and see their description and conversation as well. But there are 3 different taxes, and I think this graph does such a good job describing kind of, all of these ideas. So first things first, a regressive tax. Well, a regressive tax, what did we say? It takes a smaller proportion or percent of your income as your income rises. And so right here you see, just focus on sales and excise taxes, the ones we talked about earlier, the consumption taxes. This, as a percentage of your income, look at how big this yellow bar is, this first one. This is a huge chunk of the income of people who are in the lowest 20% of income. So we're thinking in terms of income, this first group here, we would think of as they're the poorest group. They have the least income. So the group down here with the least income, they spend a big chunk of their income on sales and excise taxes. So remember, buying clothes, gasoline, tobacco, not everyone of course, but that's one of the options, alcohol, things like that. And so I think the one that really can kind of stick for everyone is if you think about gas, so the gasoline. And the reason this ends up being regressive is, this is something that we could look into more, but in general, a lot of people are driving and have to buy gas. And there's not a huge difference necessarily between this group in the lowest 20% and, as an example, this group in the middle 20%. If they don't drive a different amount, then they're buying the same amount of gas, and that tax that you pay, they're paying the same amount of tax, just amount, like dollars, just dollars. And so if these two groups right here in the gasoline example buy the same amount of gas, What does that mean? It means they pay the same tax, right, on the gasoline. And if that's happening, well, that amount, right, it's more to this person than this person. And again, when I'm saying that, I just mean as a percent of their income, because the group in the lowest 20, they make less money. So that same gas tax that you're putting on them, that's a larger chunk of their income they have to use on gas, compared to this person. They don't have to use the same percentage of their income on gas. It's a lower. So they have, because they didn't use as much here as a percentage, they have it to spend on other things. Now, that's regressive, because each group, as you get higher here, more and more money, you're paying, as these boxes are getting smaller, a smaller percent of your income. All right? So that's gasoline as an example for you. Now, property tax, on the other hand, there's definitely small differences, but in general, these boxes, for the most part, until you get right here to the top 1%, the boxes seem to be about the same size. So this would be an example that's not necessarily regressive, nor is it progressive, because the boxes are about the same percent as you go through here. And if you're trying to think like, wait, what's happening there? Then you just have to think, okay, well, in general, what happens? In general, as you make more money, you will also, if you own property, as your example, because you're paying property taxes, you will more likely have a more expensive house. And so your income and your property tax are both growing together. And that's why the proportion's staying the same. Gasoline, all these groups are buying the same amount of gas. And so it's disproportionate when you end up looking at the groups with lower income. But if the middle group is paying more property tax, then it could be the same percent as the second group, the fourth group, and so forth. So property tax, an interesting one. It seems to be fairly kind of flat between everybody. Now, on the other hand, income taxes, we just talked about that as progressive. How do we see that in a picture? Well, the lowest 20% pays a very small amount of their income to income tax, right? A small percentage, right here, very tiny blue. And as you go up, look at what happens. Each group pays a larger percent. The blue box is getting bigger, bigger, bigger. A larger percent to income tax, because it is progressive. That is on purpose, progressive. Okay? So this is an awesome little, graph to kind of visually show you. Yellow is regressive. Boxes are getting smaller. Green overall seems fairly flat, neither regressive nor progressive. The boxes are for the most part staying the same. Blue is progressive. The boxes are getting bigger. A lot to think about, I know, but I'm hoping the visual will kind of help you think of these ideas a little bit more. Okay, so then lastly, we have another example here, and I just wanted to give you something to look at, and some of you might be more interested in this. You could dive in more. Example 5, according to the WHO, not the band, right, the World Health Organization, taxes on tobacco can sometimes be considered regressive. And so here's a link. You can read about this a little bit more. It goes into more than just that, but you can Control F for regressive and just go look at what they talk about there. So what does this mean to be regressive? Well, we got to think about this. Regressive meant that as your income increases, you pay a smaller percentage of your income on the tax. And so the WHO is describing this as regressive because in some countries and some areas, not all, but some countries and areas, right, you are more likely, we'll just focus on cigarettes for now, to smoke cigarettes. You're more likely to smoke cigarettes if you are lower income. This is not necessarily true everywhere, okay? But if you are in a place where lower income people buy cigarettes more, smoke cigarettes more, then what ends up happening, right? This tax ends up having a larger effect on them compared to the higher income groups. Okay? More of their income is a larger percent is going towards this tobacco tax than the higher income groups. Of course, there are places where this could be opposite. There are places or areas where only higher income, or not only, but more higher income people are smoking and buying cigarettes than lower income. And then this actually flips on its head and becomes progressive. But there are definitely places where the lower income groups smoke more. And so because of that, the tax ends up being regressive. All right? And it's as just tax alone, only focusing on tax, and as a group, the burden is more on the lower income groups for this tax. Now, they also talk in here, and you can find many other resources on this, for the benefits of this type of tax for these groups. And so this is interesting because there's a counterbalance. There's always counterbalances to these things. There's always pros and cons that you have to be thinking about. And so I think it's just important to always, when you're trying to learn a new idea like a regressive tax, just because you hear or you see that a tax can be regressive, you have to also stop and go, okay, what are the other, even possibly economic advantages to something like this? And you've got to counterbalance. And in some places this might be great, in some places it might not be, and there's lots of things that have to go into these policies. So you could dig into this more if you want. I think it's just a really good example of a tax that can be regressive, but there's a lot else, there are a lot of other things that are in play with whether or not it's a good or bad idea that I think are just very important that you are aware of. And if you want to get into this idea, you need to be looking more than just the tax, regressive, progressive, flat. You've got to kind of go everywhere else as well and see what other benefits or issues the tax has. So, long video, don't use the timestamps, although if you're already at the end here, you may or may not have used the timestamps. Sorry if you didn't. Lots of things to do here with this, but hopefully now that you've seen some examples, things aren't too bad.